Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
So today we're going to be in Parshat Vayigash, which means that he drew near. It's actually talking about Judah whenever he drew near. And we're going to be really focusing today on Benjamin and the goblet. The goblet that was Joseph's that he put in the sack of Benjamin. On a surface level, it's really quite unexplained. Why he put the goblet in there. What was Joseph really trying to do? What was his point in doing this? And actually we see through things in the Hebrew, especially, it's so important here, certain linguistic clues that we have in the Hebrew, as well as something in the book of Jasher, and things in the New Testament that actually bring understanding on what Joseph was doing and what the goblet represents. And out of everything, why did he put it in Benjamin's sack? He could have put it in any of the brothers' sacks, but he chose Benjamin for a very specific purpose. So the goblet's very important, and Benjamin's very important, and the mission or the message that Joseph is doing is very important. And so, in order to go into this, we first have to understand the common theme throughout the Torah. It's very simple, but the thing is, just like with anything in Torah, it's important that we receive lenses. This is the reason why it's important for teachers to give people lenses to look through so that you know how to study Torah. There was somebody recently that asked me, they said, hey, will you teach me the next step into learning how to study Torah? And that's an amazing question, and it's a question that's it's asked very little, but it's very important. How do I study Torah? What's the perspective? What's the context? What's the lens that I should look through? And it's the reason why when we say, hey, when you see this in Scripture, think about this. Or whenever you see this is actually what it means. Or it's giving you lenses. How do you study Torah? What's the way that you go about these things and understanding them? And so that's one of the things that we want to do today is learning what is the very common theme throughout the Torah so that when we're studying it and we see things, we know that it's related to a certain theme, right? And so the theme throughout all of Torah, which is a good way to understand this, because then going from the book of Joshua all the way through the New Testament, you begin to see it through this lens, okay? And this theme is summed up essentially in a Hebrew word that's called Aravoot, which is where we get the term Arev from. And Arev, in Hebrew, it means to be a guarantor for somebody. It means to be responsible. That's what it literally means, to be responsible for somebody. Okay, which is always tied together with the word rachamim, compassion, right? I did a teaching a while back where I said the Torah is summed up in one word, and it was summed up in the word rachamim. It's summed up in compassion. The entire Torah is summed up in compassion for one another. This is the Torah of the Messiah. Okay, and so we're actually going to see that this mission from Joseph with the goblet and Benjamin is actually giving the brothers an opportunity to be an Arev, to be a guarantor. He's giving you an opportunity. That's what it's all about. Okay, but first what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each book of the Torah. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and just give a real quick glimpse of compassion or Aravoot being a pledge in each one of them, so that we recognize that this theme is all throughout the Torah and everything that we read. So we start out with the book of, and I'm not choosing the first place in each book or anything, I'm just simply taking one example out of each book. Okay, so we look in Genesis 14, and this is right after Genesis 13, obviously, where Lot and Abram part ways, right? And Lot goes to Sodom, and what happens, Lot and his people and all of his belongings actually end up getting attacked, and he gets taken captive. Right? In Genesis 14, there was somebody who escaped, and they come to Abram and they say, hey, Lot's taken captive. Okay? And so what does Abram do? Abram gathers an army together, and he goes up to get Lot. And it says very specifically, it says that Abram goes all the way as far as Hobah, the area of Hobah, in order to redeem Lot. Now, the word Hobah in Hebrew is chovah, and it means debt. Okay? So we see Abraham going all the way up into the place of Lot in his life in order to take upon his debt, meaning to go into his place if he has a financial problem. Hey, your financial burden is my financial burden. Or if you just lost a parent, hey, your grief is my grief, or whatever it is. Abraham went into Lot's place, took on his debt upon himself in order to redeem him. He said, I'm a guarantor for you. Whatever you go through, I'm going through. Okay? Then we also see it in the book of Exodus. In Exodus 23, verse 4, it says, if you see the ox of your enemy or his donkey going astray, you shall surely return him. Okay? Now, how we see Yeshua say in the New Testament, you shall bless your enemies, you shall love your enemies, it's right here in the Torah. This is a commandment. And what it's actually talking about, as we've talked about before, when it comes to sheep and cattle and donkeys, is a disciple. Okay, if you see somebody going astray, you shall surely return him. And so what it's actually saying is, even though this person is a donkey or cattle of your enemy, take it as though it's your own and return him. Right? And so then we see it in Leviticus 19:14, and it says, you shall not put a stumbling block before the blind, and you shall not curse the deaf. And what it's talking about actually is one who can't hear you. It's not that somebody's literally deaf, it's behind their back, do not slander. And if somebody's blind, what it means is they're a very young disciple. They don't know any better. So whatever way you teach them is the way that they're going to go. Like Yeshua says in the New Testament, the blind lead the blind into a pit of destruction, right? And so it's talking about a very young disciple. It's talking about somebody that's new in the faith. They don't really know much about studying the scriptures. They don't know about all of these things. Meaning, have compassion on them. Go into their place and lead them very slowly. Lead them in the right way. Okay, and so then we see in the book of Numbers chapter 14, verses 12 through 20, God becomes upset with Israel. And he tells Moses, I'm going to destroy them all and I'm going to raise up a nation from you, Moses. And what does Moses do? Moses says, no, you're not going to do that, Lord. Don't do that. I'm with them. I want them to succeed. I want them to flourish. I want them to grow. I want you to forgive them and have mercy on them. And what does God say? Moses, according to your word, I will do. Moses was not going to be destroyed. But Moses said, I'm putting myself in their place. I'm standing in the gap for them. Don't do this. Okay? And then in Deuteronomy 22:4, it says, if you see the ox or the donkey of your fellow that falls in the way, what it literally says is takim imo. It does not say in English. It does not say in Hebrew, you shall raise him up. That's not what it says. Takim imo means you shall raise up with him. It does not say I raise him up. If I raised him up, that means I just reach my arm down and say get up. But raising up with him, in order to do it with him, that means I actually have to go down into his place so that we both raise up together. Any struggle you're going through, whatever it is, I'm going to come fully invested into your place as an Arev, as a guarantor. I'm going to take your burden upon me. I'm going to have full compassion and empathy with you, and I'm going to raise you up. This is the theme of all of Torah. Okay, which is the reason why in Galatians 6:2, what does Paul sum up the entire Torah with? He says, bear one another's burdens, and therefore you will fulfill the Torah of the Messiah. By bearing one another's burdens, you fulfill the entire Torah. This is what the entire Torah is about. Which is why even our sages say, treating somebody the way that you want to be treated. This is what Torah is in Tractate Shabbat in the Talmud. Okay, so it's important to understand as we go into this perspective with Joseph and Benjamin and the Goblet, that this lesson is actually being taught. Joseph represents the Messiah. What is Messiah always teaching? Messiah is always teaching Torah. So he's always, in every single situation, he's giving perspectives of how to fulfill the Torah, which is essentially having compassion and Aravoot with one another, being guarantors for one another. And actually in the Talmud, in Tractate Sanhedrin, it says, all of Israel is to be Aravim for one another. Aravim is like where we get the term Arev. Once again, all of us are to be guarantors for one another. One body, right? If my hand is hurting, it's also hurting me, right? Okay, so now we're going to get to the goblet. Okay, and so we have to think about what the goblet represents. First of all, whenever Joseph puts the goblet in their sack and Benjamin's sack and they come back, what does Joseph say that he does with the goblet? He says, didn't you know that a man like me does what?
Divination.
Divination. That's what he says. He goes, I divine with the goblet. Okay, but this is the reason why I say the Hebrew is so important. It says, Nachesh Nachesh. That's what he says. This is what I do with the goblet, Nachesh, which can be translated as divination, but this is actually the same word in Hebrew for the serpent. Whenever it talks about the serpent in Genesis 3, like the name for Satan, it's the same word, Nachash. So what it's actually talking about, what does the serpent do? The serpent brings accusation. And the serpent brings and leads people astray from God. So what it's actually talking about is a representation of the ones who are little in the faith that have been brought astray. There's a reason why he gives it to Benjamin. This is what the goblet is representing. It's representing accusation, and it's giving the brothers an opportunity to step into his place and not leave him behind. The way that God, called out Israel and said, I'm going to destroy them, they did all this. And what did Moses do? He stepped into their accusation and said, no, I'm stepping in the way for them. Joseph is giving his brothers an opportunity here. This is what the goblet is representing. Okay, it's given to somebody who is like they've gone astray. Okay, and so think about what now the purpose of the goblet. Okay, and it was specifically given to Benjamin. Okay, Benjamin has two names that are given to him very specifically, where they're not given to the other brothers. Okay, Benjamin, and all throughout, notice how it says, you shall go and get your younger brother. The 10 brothers come to him, and he says, no, go get your younger brother. But the word younger brother, hakatan, is what's used for younger, but it means to be little. Or in Hebrew, katan, it literally means to be insignificant. But it's also related to the term katan emunah, which means little of faith. The word for younger brother. It's like insignificant or little, but little of faith. And so Benjamin is actually, he's not just the younger brother, it's as though he's the one that's little in faith. And so it's like he's been left behind. The brothers are going forward and going to Joseph, but Benjamin is left behind. And Joseph says, no, you have to go and get him. The other word that he's called is Hana'ar, the lad. In Genesis 43:8, it says, I will be an Arev for the lad. I will be a guarantor for the lad, for the young boy. There's two, there's actually a third, but I'm going to tie it with another one. So there's two that are called by this name. It's Benjamin, the lad, right? It's Benjamin and Rebekah, the wife of Isaac, which we're going to get to in a moment, which is fascinating that they're both called by this name, because in its written form, this is actually masculine. And so the fact that Rebekah is called by this is fascinating. Okay, but notice it's given specifically to Benjamin. So it's as though the youngest in the faith is being accused, the youngest in the faith is being left behind, and Joseph is giving the brothers an opportunity. He's enabling them with an opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah. That's what he's actually doing. Every single thing that we come across, every circumstance in our life is divinely orchestrated. Every job opportunity, every conversation in marriage, every situation with your children, every situation with your teacher, good or bad. If it seems good or bad, every opportunity and every circumstance that presents itself in our lives is through divine providence. It's designed by God Himself to enable us with an opportunity to perform a mitzvah. A mitzvah that either we don't do, that we need to have done in our life in order to perfect our character, or that needs to be perfected. Meaning we do it, but we don't do it perfectly the way it needs to be done. We don't do it with the right heart. We don't do it with joy. We don't do it with the right perspective. It's always for the sake of performing a mitzvah. Everything that we come across. And so, if there's a commandment in Scripture that says you shall have compassion on somebody, I can't have compassion on somebody unless I have an opportunity to be compassionate. The Scripture says that we shall give to the homeless. I can't give to the homeless if there's no homeless. I can't give to the homeless if I'm only surrounded by rich people. And so God might surround us with homeless people in order to teach us how to give to the homeless, how to be more generous. So I'll share a story that's in rabbinic literature, okay, on this concept that every circumstance that we come through is in order to enable us to do a mitzvah. The same way Joseph was enabling his brothers, he was putting them in a position not to destroy them or get them in trouble. He was actually giving them an opportunity to perform a mitzvah with their brother. Okay, is in rabbinic literature, and you may think of the New Testament with this, is there's a story of a king who wants to bestow a kingdom upon his son. And so before he bestows the kingdom upon his son, he tells his son, "Son, I have something for you." He says, "Yes?" He goes, "Do not give in to a prostitute." And his son goes, "Okay, Dad, I won't give in to a prostitute." And so his dad says, "I know he says that he won't give in to a prostitute, but I don't know if he's actually going to obey me. He can't obey me if a prostitute never comes near him." So what happens? The king hires a prostitute. He says, "Go test my son." So the prostitute goes to the son with all of her beauty and certain words, begins to test him, and is trying to lure him in. And the king's son, in the middle of the testing, he had a revelation, and he said, "I know what this is. My dad gave me this commandment, and I can't be obedient unless the opportunity presents itself." He recognized that this was a test, and he became impervious to all of her temptations. And once he saw over the temptation, he became obedient, and the king bestowed the kingdom upon his son. Think about the New Testament, where the enemy comes and tries to test Yeshua. Right? So I say this to say that every situation that we come across is a means to enable us to perform a mitzvah. Okay, something that we may be lacking in. So now we get to Benjamin. We've gotten to the goblet. The goblet represents accusation. It represents, the serpent attacking the young ones, right? Because Joseph is called the Katan. He's called the young one, right? But Benjamin also represents the bride. Remember how I said Benjamin is called by the same name as Rebekah. Rebekah in Genesis 24, multiple times in that one chapter, is called Hana'arah. Meanwhile, Benjamin is called Hana'ar. But in Hebrew, they're spelled the exact same way. Rebekah represents the bride of the Messiah. She's the bride of Isaac, right? Think about what happens with Isaac. In Genesis 22, he's going to become offered. And what does God say to Abraham? "I want you to offer your only begotten son whom you love." I want you to offer him. What happened what is said in John chapter 3:16? God gave his only begotten son whom he loves, right? Isaac is a picture of Messiah ben Joseph, of the first coming of the Messiah. Okay. And so Benjamin is called by the same name as Rebekah. Not only this, think about with Rebekah, what does Abraham do to gather Rebekah? Right? In Genesis 24, he tells Eliezer, he says, "I want to get a bride for my son." So what does he do? He sends 10 camels to go gather Rebekah. Who does Joseph send to go get Benjamin? The 10 brothers. Okay. Just how Rebekah, the bride, was gathered to Isaac, who's like Messiah ben Joseph, Joseph, who is Messiah ben Joseph, is gathering Benjamin to be brought to himself. Benjamin is a representation of the bride. And not only this, but one thing that Rabbi Shapiro brings up is Rebekah was pregnant with who? Esau and Jacob. Judaism and Christianity. And so it's a representation of the bride being fulfilled with the Jew and the Gentile. Joseph is actually giving a calling here. Okay? And so notice that Benjamin is called the youngest. And the word katan, the word youngest, is related to the word katan, or the phrase katan emunah, little of faith. Now think of something that I spoke on a couple weeks ago in Matthew 18. Yeshua says in Matthew 18, verses 10 through 14, he says, "See that you do not despise one of these little ones." He uses the word katan. But remember how I talked about Yeshua is not talking about children here. What's the very next verse that he says? "For the Son of Man came to save those which are lost." He likens the young ones, the little ones, to the sheep that have gone astray, to the ones that are lost, right? And then he gives the parable. In the same paragraph, the very next verse, he gives the parable of, say somebody will have 100 sheep and one goes astray. He says, will he not leave the 99 upon the mountain and go down and get the other? Notice the words that he says. He says, will he not leave the 99 upon the mountain? They're in the high place. I will leave the mountain. I will go into the low place to rise up with him. Exactly what Deuteronomy 22:4 says. To fulfill the mitzvah of going down into the place of the one who was lost in order to raise up with him. The same way with the 10 brothers. The 10 brothers go, but because Benjamin is the youngest, it's like he's the least in the faith, he's left behind. We haven't moved at his pace, we've completely left him behind. Okay? And so, these young ones are the ones whom the serpent goes and chases after. Think about a flock of sheep. Who does the wolf come after? He comes after the stragglers on the outside. He doesn't come off of the ones that are right next to the shepherd on the inside. And so what will a good shepherd do? A good shepherd will go and get the ones who are on the outside, bring him to the very center, and one who is strong in the faith, he will say, you look after this one. This is the way that it's meant to be. Otherwise the wolves or the serpents will come and chase after these ones. And so Joseph is actually enabling his brothers by putting it in the sack and saying, I'm giving you the opportunity to go and get your brother. And you can't come to me. You can't see me. You can't know me. You can't come near me until you go and get your brother. But because Benjamin was a katan, because he was the youngest in the faith, he gets left behind. But this is the exact commandment that Yeshua is giving in order to make the bride full. It's compassion. It's being an orev for one another. Okay? So now I want to actually bring something up from the book of Jasher that brings insight to exactly what Joseph was doing with the goblet. In the book of Jasher, he actually makes himself, Joseph, he hasn't made himself known to his brothers, right? He calls Benjamin behind the scenes and he reveals himself to his brother. He says, Benjamin, it's me. Benjamin goes, oh my goodness, I now know that my brother is the king of Egypt. And so he tells him what he's going to do. He says, I am your brother Joseph. Do not reveal this unto your brothers. Behold, I will send you with them when they go away, and I will command them to be brought back again into the city, and I will take you away from them. This is after he putting the goblet into their sack. He goes, if they dare their lives and fight for you, then I shall know that they have repented of what they did unto me, and I will make myself known to them. And if they forsake you, when I take you, then you shall remain with me. It will go well with you, but I'm going to wrangle with them, and I will send them away, and I will not become known to them. And at that time, Joseph commanded his officer to fill their sacks with food, and to put each man's money into his sack, and to put the cup, the goblet, into the sack of Benjamin, and to give them provision for the road. And they did so unto them. Joseph was actually giving this goblet into his sack in order to enable them with the opportunity of having compassion and becoming an Arev for their brother. It was not a means of destruction. It was a means of an opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah. Okay? And so, we see in the book of Genesis, chapter 44, verses 32 through 45:1. It's about 3 or 4 verses long. Judah says, once they get brought back, Judah tells Joseph, no, I will be an Arev for Benjamin. Keep me here and let him and all the other brothers go on. Take me. And what is the very next verse in Genesis 45:1? Joseph was no longer able to restrain himself because he was about to start weeping. And he revealed himself unto his brothers. So according to the book of Jasher, we see this, is that the one who is little in the faith is actually being chosen by the Messiah himself. And they've been brought to our attention, to the ones who are stronger in the faith, who are more knowledgeable, this, that, and the other, as a means to give us an opportunity to perform the mitzvah of being an Arev for these people. To where it's actually backwards thinking. We look at the ones who may be little in the faith and think, oh, if they don't come along, they're the ones that are actually going to go astray and get in trouble. But that's not it. It's a paradox. What does Joseph say? No. It only appears that way. If they don't actually go after you, they've missed the entire point of the Torah. And they've missed the entire point of following in the footsteps of the Messiah. And they're the ones that are actually going to be destroyed. Because they're not doing exactly what their faith is confessing it is. Which is having compassion and going after the ones that seem least in the faith. And so whenever we see Judah say, I'm going to become an Arev for Benjamin, I'm willing to have compassion on Benjamin, and I'm willing to take his place. I'm willing to be responsible for whatever he did. It's my responsibility. Punish me instead. Whenever we saw this, what happened? Joseph revealed himself. It's not just a means of Joseph revealing himself to the body of Messiah. It's the ultimate revelation of Messiah ben Joseph within us. That's exactly what the Torah is trying to portray. Is that the moment that we become an Arev for others, it's the ultimate revelation of Messiah within us. Which is why Yeshua said in John 15:13, he said, there is no greater love than this, that a man lay his life down for his friend. There's no greater revelation of the Messiah within us. Notice Judah didn't say a word about the Messiah. He didn't say a word about Torah. All he did was do something. He just stepped into his brother's place, and it brought the revelation of the Messiah. Right? The same way with us is that you don't even have to say a word of Torah. You don't have to say a word about the Messiah. Just by taking on somebody's burden, it's the revelation by the Spirit that's actually revealed to those people around us. This is the purpose for the goblet. Joseph puts it into the sack of those who are least in the faith and says, I want you to take their burden. I want you to step into their way. And Yeshua says, don't despise one of these. These are actually the ones that you're to chase because they're the ones that make up the fullness of the bride. If we only have the learned ones, or the ones that are strong in the faith, this is not the fullness of the bride. The fullness of the bride are the ones that seem that they're the ones going off astray. And we also have to understand, little of faith does not mean little knowledge. Just like great of knowledge does not mean great in the faith. There are many people that know Scripture. They may know it out of context or this, that, and the other, but they know Scripture. They can quote Scripture. But they're very little of faith. And what I mean by this is, it's very easy for them to go astray. They know the Scriptures left and right, but as Yeshua said in his parable about the sower, the minute that persecution comes their way, or that a trial comes their way, or that a temptation with something in this world, money, drugs, alcohol, adultery, things come their way, they go astray. They know Scripture, but knowledge is not faith. Faith keeps us rooted, meaning whenever a temptation comes my way, I stay rooted in God. When persecution or struggles with money, with marriage, with whatever it is comes my way, I don't go astray, I stay rooted in God. It's these ones that are going astray that we're actually called to go and get. And so God is placing an opportunity before us. He places people in our lives that may go astray, ones that the enemy has brought astray in our lives, in order to present us with the mitzvah of going and being an Arev. That's the reason that those opportunities are placed in our lives. They're all divinely orchestrated. Right? So with that, is there any questions or comments or thoughts?
Two things struck me. One just from your teaching, and the other had struck me before. It's interesting. But through your revealing what the book of Jasher says, I don't think we knew before that Benjamin was aware of what was going on. I think that's what I took from that, right?
Yep.
So Joseph had to trust Benjamin, not to reveal that to the other 9 or the other 10. Which is interesting that he chose to do it that way. But the one that had struck me before is, through all the chapters before this, we know that Jacob loved Rachel the most versus the other 3 mothers of his children. Joseph chose Benjamin. It almost makes it easiest for that mitzvah to happen versus What if he would have chosen one of the other ones that wouldn't have been as devastating for the father to take the loss of? What would have happened then?
Well, that's interesting too, because think about how important Benjamin was to Jacob.
Right.
Think about what Yeshua says in that Matthew 18 parable. He says, "It is not the will of your Father that one of these small ones be lost." So it just goes to show the value that these ones that are less in the faith have in the eyes of the Father, the way that Benjamin was in the eyes of Jacob, in the eyes of his father. Yeah.
I think what's fascinating about all of this is the paradox that you presented. When I look at all of those different scenarios, and then you apply them to each of our lives, and you think that they're actually tests. I mean, there's other ways you can describe it, but I know my mind is just reeling with all these different scenarios that have been placed in front of me. And obviously we all have had those scenarios put in front of us. And then you hear about being compassionate and loving your enemy and praying for your enemy. And then if your enemy loses a donkey or an ox, where we're supposed to gather them. And then you think, but we're also not supposed to be with evil people. And so then if someone evil is around you and you see that you can easily help them, but you wrestle with the concept of, do I help them? Do I not help them? They're not going to be grateful for what I do. They might even hate me for doing it. And so then I wrestle with, what is this a test? How does this paradox work? What are we to do? And then you start to say, everything in our lives, which I believe, is put together through Hashem, is put together through God. Mm-hmm. Right? These are not just happenstance. So then, and you talked about perfecting our heart, right? And acting in as the Torah would instruct. So I just think it just overly, it almost makes you want to be compassionate to everybody, right?
Where do you draw the line?
Which is exactly right, yeah. Because that's a problem I have. I'm an extreme personality, so, and I'm,
Next thing you know, we're homeless.
Next thing you know, I'm homeless, but we've given it. They're living a great life in our home, and I've given them my passcodes to my account, and so I think that's the most fascinating thing about all of that. And then I think about even the ministry that you've created and the people that have been here, right? And then the ones that are no longer here, including us or anyone else, and some of the troubles that perhaps some of them may have had. And then are we letting them wander? And is that not our opportunity to perfect our own actions? Did we let someone stray? Did we fail in that? Did they fail in that? Those are the questions that cause me to think or deeper into that concept. And I that's not an easy answer for me.
Mm-hmm. I think that's something that we all struggle with. Mm-hmm. Really.
But don't you think we have to perfect it? I mean, I think that's a great description.
And balancing out.
And I think that is how we perfect it, by God constantly giving us these opportunities to do those mitzvot. Like he said that we might need to perfect that mitzvot. That's why we're constantly being presented with these opportunities.
Right. Because
the first time it was presented, we probably didn't do anything. The second time we did a little, we may not have done it right. The third time we get better, and then by the 10th time, hey, we perfected that one. Now here goes another opportunity for a different mitzvah.
Yeah. This is also the reason why it's which I did that teaching on walking in the footsteps of Messiah ben Joseph about how the 3 steps, and they were all in the plural, and that if you're crossing over the Jordan but you're alone, you messed up the journey because you left the people on the journey, right?
Yeah, I remember that.
This is the reason why it's impossible to walk and enter the fullness of the promises if it's not with the house of Israel.
Yes. Yes.
Meaning, I'm not meant to make all these decisions on my own. This is why we have community. Remember the teaching I did a couple weeks ago, and I talked about how in the end of days it's imperative that we have community.
Yeah. And
why God said it's not good for man to be alone, because man in Jewish thought is like chesed, kindness. Like Lee was just saying, like I'll just give him. It doesn't matter what you do. I'm just going to give you all of it. This is very common with man. Man is a lot of times just grace. And the wife in Jewish thought actually represents a bit of restraint. a means of, me and Katie have made jokes about it with our dog, and like how it would be with kids. It's like, man, like Nick's the good parent, because I'm just like, give them treats, and Katie's like, no, they've had too
Just
much.
give one treat. Just give one
Right, and it's out of a loving restraint to bring balance.
Yeah, yeah.
This is a lot of times with a husband and a wife, but it's the same reason why, even more so with community,
Yeah.
is why even with judges on a panel, you had multiple judges.
Like the Supreme Court.
Is to bring, but even in Jewish thought with the Sanhedrin and everything else, is
And have one making the decision.
You need multiple perspectives.
exactly.
Yes.
You need multiple perspectives to bring these things. But as Hugh said, he brought a phenomenal point. This is a reason why we'll see cycles in our lives of the same thing. Why? Because God is still desiring us to fulfill this mitzvah, or to be perfected in a certain area, meaning, hey, there's another area that I can kind of chip away certain things in your life in order for the light of Messiah to be revealed in you. So I continue designing your life to where this is what you come across.
By the nature of seeking counsel or Supreme Court or Sanhedrin, I think that created a midrash. Because I think then you have all these different strong opinions going, what do you mean you're going to give him everything? How could you not give him everything? And then you're saying, well, you should have given him everything. And then the wives are saying, don't give him anything. I can see one.
Just give him one.
Yeah, I can see all of that.
And this is what Beit Midrash was. Beit Midrash, the house of Midrash, was how do we come together to learn how do we apply the mitzvot. That's what Beit Midrash was,
Okay.
and still is today.
Yeah.
We actually come together to say, this is a mitzvah, how do I do it?
That was a great point on the midrash.
But it's interesting to me because Nick was the one who kind of really revealed that a long time ago to me, that there's certain things that are innate in man, but also, I apologize for making this point, but to be raised in a Jewish, almost Orthodox household, the thought process and the way that thought happens, and then the guilt, and then there's discussions in being a divided house where I'll start feeling bad about something, and she'll understand that I'm feeling bad about it, but she might not feel bad about what I'm feeling bad about. And I'm like, you don't understand.
I don't have the Jewish guilt.
I'm carrying this guilt and I don't feel right about it. And I never really understood it. I would just say, well, I was raised differently. But really, now I know I come by it innately, in as much as the example you used with the treats, where that's innate. That's God. That's divine by God, that you're going to give balance and restraint. Right? So I think that's a fascinating thought. It's not just, well, that's Kim and that's just Lee. It's so much more different than that. It's so much more in depth. It's all by creation, which makes it even more fascinating to think about. But anyway,
Yeah, absolutely. Go
I
ahead.
think something that's kind of built into the whole thing is I deal with that a lot. Is do I do that? Am I enabling them if I help them? Is real help that they need,
Yes.
like something else? And so I think what that does, because I know I'm learning what the Torah says about how we treat each other. But then another component that I've learned, especially since coming with Pastor Nick and Katie, is saying that questioning is what leads me to pray about it and be led by God in that specific situation, and it keeps me coming back to them and to you guys. So that the fact that he's bringing that opportunity, not only does it give me an opportunity to do a mitzvah, but it gives me an opportunity to do another mitzvah of drawing close to Hashem and drawing close to you guys. And so it's like a 3-in-1 kind of rolled into. And I may not end up doing the right thing, but the fact that every time I approach it with that is like, can be worked with like greatly. And that once I saw that, it helped me so much.
yeah.
So much.
Well, I was in the Shell station on the corner of Kingsland and Fry recently, leaving after getting gas, and I saw this lady putting air in her tire. And my instinct is to run over and to do it, because that's how I was raised. You don't know a lady do that. I don't know this lady. Then I have a midrash in my head. It's a complete argument inside my head about what I should be doing. And I'm staring at her the whole time. She's looking at me, I'm looking at her, and I'm thinking, I know I need to stop the car. And I'm thinking, if I stop the car, then I'm going to get set up. Then I'm going to get set up and I'm going to be in trouble. And then they're going to go, why did you help us total stranger? You should have called the policeman. You should have gotten involved. You know how valuable you are to the family. This is all the stuff that's going on in my head. And I just want to put air in this lady's tire. But then I start thinking that it's a test. Right? It is. It is.
Yeah, you should pray. You should say a prayer right then and there.
You're right. I
Just
should.
turn to God right then.
We thank God for Kim.
Yeah. There's a lot of activity going on. You're right. I thank God for
It's
Kim.
exhausting.
It is. Actually, like running
Actually, that's, like I really related to what you were saying, Jesse, because I struggle with the same thing, and but God has shown me too, because it has taken me to a place that I have to draw near to God, like what Jesse's saying. So I just kind of look at it as a double-edged sword, right? So when you have a double-edged sword, you have to be able to have a balance. So it's a little bit of both, but there's a balance in between, not to both extremes, because my husband and I too, we just kind of both at both extremes, and I have to draw near to that balance. But as you draw near to the balance is God, so that's what helps you. He's the one that helps you. So
I think
you guys
you
spoke
turned
about
to him, then he kind of makes the decision.
Yeah, and I actually look at it as a superpower, right? So it's a superpower, and when you have a superpower, you have to be able to balance it, because I think about just having this something strong and it's a gift, so
For sure.
it's a gift. So I look at it as as your particular gift. You just have to balance it because it's a double-edged sword, because you could get hurt or you could get puffed up, because sometimes we do things with the wrong intention
Yeah.
too. So that's another thing God has shown me, like, okay, why are you doing this? Are you doing this for you to get the glory or for
God.
me to get the glory?
Right.
So it's a lot of things. I'm not saying those, but for me that's kind of what it was. Part of the thing that God was wanting to show me, and also it's kind of like a thorn on your side. That God left Jacob with the thorn on his side, right? But it was for a purpose, for him to draw near to God. So I think that's Jesse's point. I think it's pretty the main point where you're going to get the balance from drawing near to God on that particular superpower that you do have. And you have to be able to.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think the way Nick shared the lesson today about it being a mitzvah gave me a total different perspective, and especially when Jesse brought up, are you enabling that person? A lot of times when we think about what is this person gonna do with what I give them, a lot of time calls us not to fulfill that mitzvah. Before I didn't see it as a mitzvah, so it brings so much meaning to it, more emphasize. It's more of a blessing to give it than it is to be the one receiving it. So when you look at it as a mitzvah, the mitzvah isn't necessarily the person receiving it. It's something God is doing in my heart. I mean, actually obeying Him and giving it. It's not what they're going to do with it. That has nothing to do with it.
Sure.
It's me being obedient to God, that He blessed me with something to be able to fulfill this mitzvah.
Right.
Forget what they do with it. Obey God.
Because you're my wife, I can't do that to anyone else here.
But on the less, I've never heard it explained. I've listened to the story, I've read the story, but when I think about why did Joseph put the goblet and into the sack, I always thought about it solely. And when you shared from the Talmud,
Book of Jasher.
the book of Jesh, you showed when he spoke with Benjamin and explained to him what he was going to do. I always only saw it one way, like he's doing this just to test his brothers to see if they had changed, if they were the same way they were before. But when you brought up it, it was giving them an opportunity for them to do a mitzvah. That
That's
just blew
huge.
my mind.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's right there.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Midrash Agadah is meant to do. So this is known as Midrash Sefer HaYashar, Midrash Book of Jasher. Whether that literally happened, or whether that was really the reason, is irrelevant.
Right.
What it's doing to your mind and to your heart right now, making you think, that's the point of Midrash.
So I can apply that to these situations
We're not to
in
go
my life today.
We're not to go home and ask, but did he really have that conversation with Benjamin? If you did, you missed the point. It's irrelevant.
That's not the issue.
It's about what is it doing to your heart. Now I'm recognizing that any hard situation that I come across, any good situation that I come across, any merit that comes to me, God brought. Maybe it's teaching me, am I still able to remain humble? Or anytime I come across the Red Sea, God's brought me across this impossible obstacle to say, am I still just going to sit there and say, I don't know, but I have faith in God? You're always coming. Anytime you come across anything, now this teaching is seared into your mind as, it's an opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to do something of a mitzvah and perfecting my character
Yeah.
to be more like the Messiah.
Yeah.
Every situation, every circumstance, every conversation, everything.
Yeah, the obvious perspective is not the obvious perspective any longer.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fascinating thought.
But this right here, notice what's happening was how Lee was saying, you know, do I do this? Do I not do this? And then Jesse comes with, yeah, well, you do this or you don't do this. And then all, you know, everybody, you know, different people bring in their perspective. Essentially, this is Beit Midrash. Beit Midrash means house of Midrash. What it was we take a principle or we take a mitzvah and we go to the house of Midrash, we study it, and we learn how do we apply it as a community. This is what Beit Midrash is. Without me ever saying, let's build a Beit Midrash, it's just been about, hey, on Shabbat, the Revelation Church is a congregation. You know, afterwards we have fellowship, after the teaching, we do this, that, and the other. And it's turned into Beit Midrash. This is what it is, to where we can leave here and we can say, now when I come across these circumstances, I know better how to apply them or to navigate them. I know what to do. This is exactly what is intended for the body of Messiah, is Beit Midrash.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yes,
It is a superpower.
it is.
It's your superpower. Yeah, that's how I look at it. Because I thought about it
I got
as
my
being
cake.
negative way.
You do have your cake. You tell me.
The other thing I kept thinking about was I couldn't help stop thinking when you were mentioning what the ruler did with his son when he wanted to give him the kingdom. You know, he had to be presented with an opportunity to be obedient. I kept thinking about Job. You know, Job was blessed; he had everything, and Satan goes to God and says, "Well, the reason why he's praising you and worshiping because you give him everything." You know, and it's like Job had to be presented with a reason not to praise God, not to have faith, not to love God. So God allowed Satan to test him, but he couldn't kill him. And when he lost everything, it showed even more proof to us as the readers that Job didn't love God and worship God because of what God gave him. He loved God for who God is,
Yes.
not for what he has done.
Right. You're
Yeah.
it's steadfast.
Probably looking for her.
Are we
So-
going on to the dessert?
We're about to.
That's on the same
We're about-
part.
Jesse
has a
Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
I was just gonna say the point about the hakaton,
Hakatan,
the
yeah.
little one. It reminds me of you should have talking about how we see these little what you've done unto the least of these you've done unto me.
Yeah.
When did we see you hungry or sick
Yeah.
or? But there's also a parable that he tells about. I think it was a wedding banquet where he invites all his friends and all the people who are they kind of in the parable from what I remember they seem kind of well-to-do and they don't want to come. They have excuses why not. And then he says, go out to the highways and the byways and invite them to
Yeah.
come. There's room for everybody, but invite them to come. And that, to me, like even what you were talking about earlier about having people in our life that seems like they'd laugh in your face. And to me, when I used to read that parable when I was younger, I think, how do we do that? Because I feel like, you know, if I were in that circumstance, you know, you go out and invite those people, they'll laugh in your face. But those are the people that we need to be on the lookout for, that maybe God is working in the most to be able, like they're ready to come in, like you were saying earlier. Like we don't know where people are at in their heart, like what they're going to do with it. That reminded me as well, like we don't know where they're at in their heart. But when God presents us that opportunity, we don't know what they may be ready for and where they're at on the inside. So when we obey, it's just that connection, that small little, sometimes it's just a little bridge that they need help to get over. And so it's being willing to do that, even in the seemingly insignificant moments or things that we do.
And it all falls into God's will. So
And most importantly, like we see with the end of Joseph, was once Judah become the Arev, Joseph revealed himself,
Yeah, lock the door. Yeah.
right? So to anybody that we become an Arev to, or show compassion to in that sense, be a guarantor to, there's a supernatural revelation taking place. Even if they don't say anything, there's a supernatural revelation taking place.
Wasn't Jesus from the tribe of Judah? So like what he did and standing in the gap made like an ultimate thing for his lineage for Messiah to come through. So like we have to think about like our actions, like they not only affect now, they affect like the future generations and just everything that
It's
comes
true.
after.
That's good.
It's true, because imagine
Yeah.
us are being gone from this earth, and someone now is acting the way you acted because you model behavior, which changes another life. I mean, it's infinite.
Yeah, it's infinite.
How far-reaching something like
I mean,
that.
that kind of brings you back to Adam and Eve.
It really does.
I mean, that kind of changed everything, what they did.
Yeah.
It is interesting too that Joseph's line ended up, going with the 10 tribes, and they were the idolaters, right? Whereas Judah's line became the line of, like you were saying, Yeshua. Not that
Yeah,
they're
so-
all
Yeah.
It's also interesting when we think when you brought up from the book of Jasher, the Midrash on Joseph giving Benjamin, revealing what he was going to do, and then Benjamin had to keep it secret. And it was when you were saying earlier, Terry, that he had to trust him not to reveal to his brothers. And to me, it makes me think, like, we don't know if Joseph was supposed to share his dream with his brothers or the way he did it, but it's almost like maybe that was an opportunity for Benjamin to, like, not repeat Joseph's mistake of maybe getting puffed up by the dream or something like that. But it was obviously, Joseph was in a position to help his brothers, and so was Benjamin eventually. But the way Benjamin approached it was with, like, humility and allowing God to, like, the first time around, and Joseph kind of got humbled, and later on he was able to bring rectification. But that's another,
Yeah.
maybe another mitzvah too.
There's so many ways to look at it, huh?
Absolutely. A big thing, just for us to take away though is, just recognizing that, really valuing and not just valuing, but actually pursuing the katans. The ones that are smaller in the faith, or the ones that have gone astray. Notice those.
Insignificant ones.
The ones that seem insignificant,
Seem
right?
insignificant.
Even though they're not, they're actually just, as we saw with Benjamin being so incredibly valuable in the eyes of Jacob, right? And in the eyes of the father. And so, notice those 5 instances that I listed all throughout the Torah, all of them having a perspective or relation to one who has somehow in some way gone astray. Right? Somehow the serpent, the goblet, has led them astray, or they're pinpointed as one that has gone astray. In some way, shape, or form, just stepping in as an Arev, with those people, and recognizing that, God's given us that opportunity to do a mitzvah. Because, one of the fascinating things that, and when your heart starts to get into this perspective, it's a very good direction. Be encouraged by it. Is, Rabbi Bernstein will ask, why do we do a mitzvah? What's the purpose that we do a mitzvah? In order for us to be able to do another mitzvah. That's the reason we do a mitzvah. Is so that we can do another one. So that God will put another opportunity in front of us to say, I'm actually entrusting you with this mitzvah. It's actually something that's supposed to be valued and precious. The same way, if the Father gives us, let's just put it in the perspective of money. He puts money into your hands, and you stewarded it well. Well done, good and faithful servant. Now I can give you more. Now I can allow you to do another mitzvah. The people that are walking in God's ways, God's opening many, many doors for those individuals to do mitzvot. To do things that glorify Him. As Yeshua said, do these good deeds so that people will glorify your Father that's in heaven. So it's the reason why we use the expression run to do a mitzvah. Don't just walk there. In the Talmud it says, when you're walking to synagogue or Beit Midrash, they say, you actually should teach your family to run. When you're getting out of the car, or you're leaving your house to go there, you should actually be running. Now don't be speeding in your car, be safe. But they say, because you're excited to get there. And whenever you're leaving Beit Midrash or synagogue, back to your car, back to your home, walk very, very slowly. Because it's actually disrespectful to do it quickly, as though you couldn't wait to get out of there. The same way we should do it with mitzvahs. is running to do a mitzvah. And when we're leaving in a way of reflection, like, man, I hope that I get to do that again. You know? All right, well, let me pray, and then we've got food and everything else.
Do you think that'll work if the cop pull us over and say, hey, our rabbi pastor told us that we got to hurry up and get there, man. We're going to synagogue, got to get
No,
there.
because the mitzvah is to guard your life. And now you're putting yours and others in danger by speeding. Come on, Hugh.
Well, hey, that's why it says drive slow for the little ones.
Drive slow for the tatis that are learning how to drive.
I am a good driver, actually.
I have no doubt of this.
You'll get better, though. You'll get better.
All right.